The mountains of eastern Tennessee had seen their share of storms, but nothing like what was rolling in that October afternoon. Captain Sarah Mitchell stood on the tarmac of Whitlow Air National Guard Base, watching the sky turn from gray to an angry shade of green. The wind whipped her dark hair across her face as she checked the tie-downs on the A-10 Thunderbolt behind her one more time. "Still babying that old hog, Mitchell." Sarah turned to see Major Derek Hastings strutting across the flight line, his pressed uniform looking like he'd just stepped out of a recruitment poster. Behind him, two younger officers laughed at his comment. "Just doing my job, sir," Sarah replied evenly, though her jaw tightened. "Your job?" Hastings stopped a few feet away, his arms crossed. "You know, some of us still remember when the Guard was serious business, before they started handing out flight slots like participation trophies." Sarah had heard this speech before. In the 10 years since she'd earned her wings, she'd heard every variation of it. Too many people at Whitlow couldn't seem to accept that a woman could fly the A-10, the Air Force's legendary tank killer. Never mind that she'd logged more combat hours than half the pilots on base. Never mind her 2 air medals and a distinguished flying cross. To men like Hastings, she would always be an outsider. "The bird's secure, sir," she said, refusing to take the bait. "I'm heading to the briefing." "Briefing's canceled," Hastings said with a smirk. "Didn't you hear? We're grounding all aircraft. This storm's supposed to be a monster. They're evacuating the valley towns." Sarah glanced at the mountains that ringed the base. Beyond those peaks lay Copper Creek, a town of about 800 people, her hometown, where her sister still lived with her 2 kids, where Sarah had learned to dream about flying by watching crop dusters work the fields every summer. "Evacuating?" Sarah's stomach tightened. "When?" "Started about an hour ago." Hastings checked his watch, an expensive piece that probably cost more than Sarah made in a month. "They've got maybe 3 hours before this thing hits. Roads are already jamming up. It's going to be messy." He started to walk away, then paused. "Oh, and Mitchell, don't get any hero ideas. The base commander wants all personnel in the shelter before the storm arrives. That includes you and your precious warthog." Sarah watched him go, her mind already racing. 3 hours. Copper Creek was 40 miles away by road, most of it winding mountain highway. If the roads were already clogged with evacuation traffic, her sister Emma might not make it out in time. Emma's car was 15 years old and had been giving her trouble. And with 2 young kids, 7-year-old Tyler and 4-year-old Grace, traveling would be slow. Sarah pulled out her phone and dialed Emma's number. It rang 6 times before going to voicemail. "Emma, it's Sarah. Call me as soon as you get this. Get the kids and get out of town now. I mean right now. Don't pack, just go, I love you." She tried twice more over the next 10 minutes. No answer. The wind was picking up, and the first drops of rain began to fall, fat and heavy. Sarah looked at the A-10 behind her. The Thunderbolt II, affectionately called the Warthog by pilots who flew her. She was ugly and loud and slow compared to modern fighters, but she was tough. Built around a massive 7-barrel Gatling gun, designed to fly low and slow and take punishment that would tear apart any other aircraft. Sarah had been flying A-10s for a decade. She knew every switch, every system, every sound the engines made. She'd flown combat missions in Afghanistan, provided close air support for troops under fire, and brought her bird home with battle damage that would have terrified most pilots. The A-10 wasn't fast or pretty, but it was reliable, and more importantly, it could fly in conditions that kept other aircraft grounded. "You thinking what I think you're thinking?" Sarah turned to find Master Sergeant Ray Torres walking up. Ray was 52, built like a barrel, and had been maintaining A-10s longer than Sarah had been alive. He was one of the few people on base who treated her like an equal. "I can't reach my sister," Sarah said quietly. "She's in Copper Creek with her kids." Ray's weathered face grew serious. "That's in the direct path of this storm." "I know. They grounded all flights, Captain." "I know that too." Ray looked at the sky, then at the A-10, then back at Sarah. He was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he sighed. "If you were going to do something foolish, which you're not, you'd want to do it in the next 20 minutes. After that, this storm's going to be right on top of us." "Ray, I'm not asking you to." "I'm not hearing anything," Ray interrupted. "I'm just an old mechanic who needs to check something in the hangar for the next half hour. What happens on this flight line while I'm gone is none of my business." He met her eyes. In that look, Sarah saw understanding. Ray had 3 kids of his own. He knew what it meant to be family. "Thank you," Sarah said softly. Ray nodded and walked away without another word. Sarah stood there for exactly 10 seconds, weighing her options. Staying meant following orders and keeping her career safe. It meant trusting that the evacuation would work, that Emma would get out in time, that everything would be fine. But Sarah had learned in Afghanistan that sometimes trusting the system got people killed. Sometimes you had to break the rules to do what was right. She made her decision. Moving quickly, Sarah performed a rapid pre-flight inspection of the A-10. Everything looked good. The fuel tanks were full. They always kept the alert birds ready to launch. She grabbed her flight suit from the storage locker, pulled it on over her uniform, and snatched her helmet bag. The rain was falling harder now, and thunder rumbled in the distance. The cockpit of an A-10 was familiar territory. Sarah strapped in, her hands moving through the startup sequence automatically. The twin engines wound up with their distinctive whine, and the aircraft shuddered to life around her. She pulled on her helmet and contacted the tower. Whitlow Tower, Rattler 3-1 requesting taxi clearance. There was a long pause, then a voice she didn't recognize came back. Rattler 3-1, all aircraft are grounded due to weather. Return to parking. Tower, I have an emergency, requesting immediate departure clearance. Another pause, longer this time. Sarah could imagine the confusion in the tower. The base commander had been clear about grounding all flights, but military regulations also gave pilots authority in true emergencies. Rattler 3-1, state the nature of your emergency. Sarah took a breath. Tower, I have reason to believe civilians are in imminent danger in Copper Creek. I'm conducting an emergency reconnaissance flight. It was a stretch of the truth, but not quite a lie. She did believe Emma was in danger, and she would be conducting reconnaissance. She just might also be landing to pick up her family if she had to. Rattler 3-1, stand by. Sarah didn't wait. She released the brakes and started rolling toward the taxiway. If they wanted to stop her, they'd have to send someone to physically block the runway. The A-10 taxied like a tank, slow and deliberate. Rain was sheeting across the canopy now. Rattler 3-1, be advised the base commander has been notified of your unauthorized departure. You are ordered to return to parking immediately. Tower, I have a responsibility to check on those civilians. I'm taking off. Rattler 3-1, if you take off, you will face disciplinary action. Sarah turned onto the runway. Through the rain, she could see a security vehicle racing toward her position. But they were too late. She pushed the throttles forward, and the A-10 began its takeoff roll. The Warthog wasn't built for speed, but she was built tough. Sarah pulled back on the stick, and the aircraft lifted into the storm. The turbulence hit immediately. The A-10 bucked and shuddered as Sarah climbed through the clouds. Rain hammered against the canopy. Lightning flashed close enough that she could smell ozone in the cockpit. Any other aircraft would have turned back. But the A-10 was designed to take ground fire and keep flying. A thunderstorm, no matter how fierce, wasn't going to bring her down. Sarah leveled off at 3,000 feet and turned toward Copper Creek. Visibility was almost zero. She flew on instruments, watching the terrain warnings light up her displays as she navigated between the mountain peaks. The storm was intensifying by the minute. The meteorologists had been right. This was going to be bad. She tried Emma's phone again on the emergency frequency. No signal. The storm was probably taking down cell towers. 15 minutes into the flight, Sarah broke through the worst of the clouds and got her first visual of the valley. What she saw made her blood run cold. The river that ran through Copper Creek had already jumped its banks. Water was spreading across the valley floor, turning roads into streams and fields into lakes. She could see cars trying to navigate the flooding, some of them already stalled. The main highway out of town was backed up for miles, a snake of red taillights barely moving. And the storm was getting worse. Sarah descended lower, pushing the A-10 down to 500 feet. The engines roared as she flew over the town, searching. There, Emma's neighborhood. She spotted the familiar streets, the park where she'd played as a kid, the small house where Emma lived with her children. Emma's car was still in the driveway. Sarah's heart sank. The water was already ankle-deep in the streets around the house. Another hour and it would be much deeper. The evacuation had failed. People were trapped. She keyed her radio, switching to the emergency frequency. This is Air National Guard Captain Sarah Mitchell to any emergency services receiving. Copper Creek is flooding rapidly. Repeat, Copper Creek is flooding. Multiple civilians trapped. requesting immediate assistance. Static answered her. Sarah circled again, lower this time. She could see people on roofs now, families who had climbed up to escape the rising water. The storm wasn't done, more rain was coming. She could see it on her radar, a solid wall of precipitation bearing down on the valley. The A-10 had been designed as a ground attack aircraft. It could destroy tanks, support troops, and survive incredible damage. But it had never been designed for rescue operations. The aircraft had no hoist, no cargo capacity beyond the cockpit. Sarah couldn't land in the flooded streets, and even if she couldn't carry anyone. But she had to do something. Sarah pulled up and circled the town, her mind racing. She could fly back to base, report what she'd seen, and hope rescue teams could reach Copper Creek in time. But that would take hours, and the people below didn't have hours. She could stay and provide reconnaissance, marking the locations of stranded civilians. But marking locations didn't save lives. Then she saw it. On the north side of town, past the flooding, there was a stretch of open ground, old McKinney's farm. Sarah had ridden horses there as a teenager. The land was elevated above the floodwaters, and the main field was flat and long, not a runway but close enough. If she could land there, she might be able to reach Emma's house on foot. It was crazy. It was dangerous. It was probably impossible. But it was all she had. Sarah lined up her approach, fighting the wind. The A-10 dropped toward the field, buffeted by gusts that pushed her left and right. Landing an aircraft designed for concrete runways on a grass field in the middle of a hurricane-force storm was suicide. But Sarah had landed the A-10 on damaged runways in Afghanistan under enemy fire. She'd brought the bird down with half her instruments shot out and one engine failing. She could do this. The wheels touched down hard. The A-10 bounced, settled, bounced again. Sarah stood on the brakes, feeling the aircraft slide on the wet grass. For a terrifying moment, she thought they were going to flip. Then the bird straightened out and slowed, rolling to a stop just short of a fence line. Sarah sat in the cockpit, her heart pounding. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. Now came the hard part. She shut down the engines and popped the canopy. Rain immediately poured in, soaking her flight suit. Sarah climbed out and dropped to the muddy ground. The wind nearly knocked her off her feet. Lightning cracked overhead, so close it made her ears ring. Emma's house was a mile away through the flooding. Sarah started running. The water was deeper than it looked from the air. Within 100 yards, it was up to her knees, and the current was strong. Sarah pushed forward, using parked cars and fences to steady herself. The rain was so heavy she could barely see 10 feet ahead. A car drifted past her, carried by the current. Empty, thank God, but it showed how powerful the flood had become. Sarah kept moving, her flight boots filling with water, her muscles burning. Emma's street was submerged. The water was waist-deep here, and debris swirled in the current, tree branches, trash cans, pieces of somebody's fence. Sarah waded forward, calling out. Emma, it's Sarah. No answer, just the roar of wind and rain. Sarah reached the house. The front door was open, swinging in the current. Her stomach dropped. She pushed inside, water rushing around her legs. Emma, Tyler, Grace. The house was a mess. Furniture floated in the living room. Family photos drifted past her in the murky water, but no people. Sarah climbed the stairs to the second floor. Emma. A small voice answered, Aunt Sarah. Relief flooded through her. Tyler, where are you, buddy? In my room. Sarah splashed down the hall and pushed open Tyler's door. Her nephew sat on his bed, clutching his little sister. Grace was crying, her face buried in Tyler's shoulder. They were both soaked and terrified. It's okay, Sarah said, moving to them quickly. It's okay, I'm here, where's your mom? She went to get help, Tyler said, his voice shaking. The car wouldn't start, and she said she had to find someone. She told us to stay upstairs and wait. But that was a long time ago, and the water keeps getting higher, and I was scared. You did great, Sarah interrupted, pulling them both into a hug. You did exactly right. I'm so proud of you. Grace pulled back and looked at her with wide eyes. Are we gonna die? No, sweetie, absolutely not. I'm going to get you out of here. How? Tyler asked. The water's everywhere. I flew here in my plane, Sarah said. It's not far. We're going to walk there together, and then I'm going to fly you somewhere safe. You flew here? Tyler's fear was momentarily replaced by wonder. In the storm. In the storm, Sarah confirmed. Now come on, we need to move fast. She grabbed some blankets from Tyler's closet and wrapped them around the kids as best she could. It wouldn't help much in the rain, but it was better than nothing. Then she lifted Grace onto her hip and took Tyler's hand. "Stay close to me," she said. "The water's deep, but I won't let go, I promise." They made their way downstairs. The water had risen in just the few minutes Sarah had been inside. It was chest-deep now in the living room, and the current was stronger. Sarah held Grace above the water and kept a firm grip on Tyler's hand. Getting out of the house was terrifying. The current grabbed at them immediately, trying to sweep them downstream. Sarah braced against it, using every ounce of strength to keep them moving forward. Tyler stumbled, and Sarah caught him, pulling him up. "I've got you," she said. "Keep going." Step by step, they fought through the flood. Sarah's arms screamed with the effort of carrying Grace and holding Tyler. The wind tried to knock them over. Lightning struck close enough that Tyler yelped, but Sarah kept them moving. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, they reached higher ground. The water receded to their ankles, then to puddles. Sarah set Grace down and bent over, gasping for breath. Every muscle in her body was on fire. "Is that your plane?" Tyler pointed across the field. The A-10 sat where Sarah had left it, looking like some prehistoric creature huddled against the storm. Beautiful and impossible. "That's her," Sarah said, straightening up. "Come on, we're almost there." They ran the last 100 yards. Sarah helped Tyler climb the ladder to the cockpit, then passed Grace up to him. The cockpit of an A-10 wasn't designed for passengers, but Sarah managed to strap both kids into the rear space behind the ejection seat. It was cramped and uncomfortable, but it would work for the short flight. "This is so cool," Tyler said, his fear temporarily forgotten as he looked at all the instruments. Sarah climbed in and strapped herself in. Her hands were shaking as she reached for the startup switches. She'd just done something probably impossible. Now she had to do it again, take off from a grass field in a hurricane with 2 children on board. No pressure. The engines wound up, and Sarah taxied to the far end of the field. She needed every inch of runway she could get. Rain pounded the canopy as she ran through her pre-takeoff checks. "Hold on tight, guys," she called back. "This might be bumpy." She pushed the throttles forward. The A-10 began to roll, picking up speed slowly, too slowly. The grass was slick with rain, robbing the wheels of traction. Sarah watched the tree line at the end of the field racing toward them. They weren't going to make it. She pulled back on the stick anyway, hauling the A-10 into the air through sheer willpower. The wheels left the ground with maybe 50 feet to spare. The aircraft clawed for altitude, engines screaming. Behind her, Tyler whooped, "We're flying." Sarah allowed herself a small smile as she banked away from Copper Creek and turned back toward Whitlow. They'd made it. Against all odds, they'd made it. But as the base appeared through the rain ahead, Sarah saw the security vehicles lined up on the taxiway. The base commander was waiting, and she knew her troubles were just beginning. The landing at Whitlow was smooth despite the storm. Sarah taxied the A-10 toward the hangar where she could see a cluster of people waiting. Security police, the base commander, Major Hastings with his arms crossed and a satisfied smirk on his face. Through the rain-streaked canopy, she could make out Colonel Patricia Vance, the wing commander, standing with her hands on her hips. Sarah shut down the engines and helped Tyler and Grace climb out of the cockpit. The kids were soaked and exhausted but unharmed. Master Sergeant Torres appeared with blankets, wrapping them around the children without a word. His face was carefully neutral, but Sarah caught the slight nod he gave her. Ray understood. "Captain Mitchell," Colonel Vance's voice cut through the rain. "My office now." Sarah turned to Torres. "Ray, can you?" "I'll get them to the medical center, get them checked out and warmed up," Ray said quietly. "Don't worry about them. You've got bigger problems." Sarah knelt down in front of Tyler and Grace. "You two are going to go with Sergeant Torres. He's a friend. He'll take care of you until I can find your mom, okay?" Grace wrapped her small arms around Sarah's neck. "Thank you for saving us, Aunt Sarah." "I love you both," Sarah said, hugging them tight. "I'll come find you as soon as I can." She watched Ray lead them away, then turned to face the music. Colonel Vance's office was on the second floor of the operations building. Sarah walked the corridors dripping wet, leaving puddles with every step. Other personnel stared as she passed. Word had already spread about what she'd done. The colonel's office was austere. Regulation desk, filing cabinets, a wall of certificates and unit photos. Vance stood behind her desk, still in her flight suit. She'd been a fighter pilot before taking command of the wing, and she carried herself with the no-nonsense authority of someone who had flown combat missions and commanded respect through competence. Major Hastings was already there, leaning against the wall with barely concealed glee. "Sit," Vance ordered. Sarah sat, water pooling around her boots. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Vance's voice was ice. "You disobeyed a direct order. You stole government property. You flew unauthorized in restricted airspace during a weather emergency. You endangered yourself and 2 civilians. The list of regulations you violated is so long I don't even know where to begin." "Yes, ma'am," Sarah said quietly. "Yes, ma'am, that's all you have to say." Sarah met the colonel's eyes. "Those 2 civilians are my niece and nephew. They would have drowned if I hadn't gone. I made a choice." "You made a choice," Hastings repeated, pushing off the wall. "You decided that your judgment was more important than the chain of command. You decided that military discipline doesn't apply to you." "I decided to save 2 children," Sarah shot back. "By breaking every rule in the book," Hastings stepped closer. "This is exactly what I've been saying, Colonel. Mitchell thinks she's special. She thinks she can do whatever she wants because she's got a few medals and can fly that ugly old plane. This is what happens when we lower standards." "Major, that's enough," Vance said sharply. But Hastings was on a roll. "No, ma'am, it's not enough. This is my point exactly. The Guard has become soft. We've got pilots who think feelings matter more than orders. Captain Mitchell's little stunt today could have killed her and those kids. And for what? To prove she's a hero." "To save their lives," Sarah said, her voice rising. "They're alive because of what I did." "And what about the next time?" Hastings demanded. "What happens when every pilot decides they know better than their commanding officer? What happens to discipline? What happens to the mission?" "The mission is to protect people," Sarah fired back. "That's what I did." "The mission is to follow orders," Hastings was shouting now. "Without discipline, we're not a military, we're a mob with expensive equipment. You don't get to pick and choose which rules apply to you, Captain. None of us do." Vance held up a hand. "Both of you stop right now." The room fell silent. The colonel walked to her window and looked out at the storm. Rain lashed against the glass. After a long moment, she turned back. "Captain Mitchell, you violated direct orders from both the tower and the base commander. Under normal circumstances, that would result in court-martial charges. You understand that?" "Yes, ma'am." "However," Vance paused, "these are not normal circumstances. You were correct that those children were in imminent danger. The flooding in Copper Creek has turned catastrophic. Emergency services couldn't reach the town. If you hadn't extracted those children, they likely would have died." Hastings opened his mouth, but Vance silenced him with a look. "That being said," the colonel continued, "the fact that your actions saved lives doesn't erase the fact that you broke regulations. I have to answer to people too, Captain. The state adjutant general is already asking questions. The FAA wants to know why an A-10 was flying unauthorized in civilian airspace during a weather emergency. This isn't going away." "I understand, ma'am." "Do you?" Vance studied her. "Because I'm not sure you understand what you've put in motion. There are people who are going to use this incident to question whether women should be flying combat aircraft. They're going to point to you as proof that female pilots are too emotional, too willing to break rules, too unreliable." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She'd known there would be consequences for her actions, but she hadn't thought about how those consequences might affect other women pilots. "That's not fair," Sarah said quietly. "No, it's not," Vance agreed. "But it's reality. Major Hastings isn't the only one who thinks like he does. There are generals and politicians who believe what you did today proves their point about women in combat roles. They're going to use you as an example." "So what do I do?" Vance returned to her desk and sat down. "For now, you're grounded. Your flight status is suspended pending investigation. You'll be assigned to administrative duties until the chain of command decides how to proceed. There will be an inquiry. You'll have to testify, and depending on how that goes, you may face charges." Sarah felt numb. Flying was her life. The A-10 was part of her soul. The thought of being grounded, of never climbing into that cockpit again, was almost unbearable. "I'd do it again," she said. "If I had to make the same choice, I'd do it again." I know, Vance said, and for the first time there was something that might have been sympathy in her voice. That's what worries me, dismissed. Sarah stood and saluted. She left the office and walked through the corridors in a daze. Outside, the storm was finally starting to break. The rain was lighter and gaps appeared in the clouds. She found her way to the medical center. Ray Torres was sitting in the waiting area, looking uncomfortable in the molded plastic chairs. How are they? Sarah asked. Doctor's checking them out now, Ray said. They're good kids, brave. Tyler told me all about how you flew through the lightning to save them. He thinks you're a superhero. Sarah sank into the chair next to him. I'm grounded, Ray. I heard. Pending investigation, maybe court-martial. Ray was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You know what I think about what you did today? What? I think you're the best pilot I've ever worked with. I've been around military aviation for 30 years, seen hundreds of pilots. Most of them are good, some are great. But you're special. Not because you're a woman, not because you had something to prove, but because when it mattered, when lives were on the line, you did what needed to be done. That's what a real pilot does. Sarah felt tears threatening and blinked them back. Hastings thinks I'm a disgrace to the uniform. Hastings is a politician in a flight suit, Ray said bluntly. He cares more about how things look than how things are. Don't listen to him. The door to the examination room opened and a young doctor emerged. Captain Mitchell, the children are fine. Minor hypothermia, some scrapes and bruises, but nothing serious. You got them out just in time. Relief washed over Sarah. Can I see them? Of course. Tyler and Grace were sitting on an exam table, wrapped in warm blankets and holding cups of hot chocolate. When Grace saw Sarah, she reached out with both arms. Sarah gathered her into a hug. Hey, sweetie, how are you feeling? Warm, Grace mumbled into her shoulder. The doctor gave me chocolate. I see that. Tyler was watching her with solemn eyes. Aunt Sarah, are you in trouble because of us? The question hit harder than any of Hastings's accusations. Sarah sat on the exam table next to him. Tyler, look at me. You and Grace are the most important things in the world. I will never, ever regret coming to get you. Whatever happens to me, it was worth it. You understand? But Mom always says we shouldn't break the rules. Your mom is right. Rules are important. But sometimes, very rarely, there are situations where doing the right thing means breaking rules. This was one of those times, and I would make the same choice 1,000 times over. Tyler thought about this, then nodded. Okay, but for what it's worth, I think you're the coolest aunt ever. Sarah smiled despite everything. Thanks, buddy. A commotion in the hallway made them all turn. Sarah heard a familiar voice calling out, frantic and desperate. Tyler, Grace, someone said they're here. Where are my bobbies? Emma burst through the door, soaking wet and covered in mud. Her hair was plastered to her face, her clothes torn. She looked like she'd been through a war. When she saw her children, she let out a sob and ran to them. Oh God, oh thank God, Emma cried, pulling them both into her arms. I thought I'd lost you, I thought. Mom, Grace was crying too. Aunt Sarah saved us. She flew her plane through the storm. Emma looked up at Sarah, her eyes streaming. You came. I couldn't reach you. The phone wasn't working, and I thought. Sarah pulled her sister into the hug, the four of them clinging together. I came, she said simply. I'll always come. They stayed like that for a long time until finally Emma pulled back and wiped her eyes. What happened? How did you find them? Sarah explained the flight, the landing, wading through the flood to reach the house. Emma listened in growing horror. You could have died, Emma whispered. But I didn't, and neither did Tyler and Grace. The car wouldn't start, Emma said, her voice breaking. I tried everything. I thought if I could just get to the Hendersons' place, they have that big truck, maybe they could help. But by the time I got there, the water was too high. I couldn't get back. I've been trying to reach the house for hours, but emergency services wouldn't let anyone through, and she started crying again. If you hadn't come. But I did, Sarah said firmly. Don't think about what might have happened. We're all here. We're all safe. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Excuse me, but we need to do an exam on you too, ma'am. You look like you've been through quite an ordeal. Emma nodded and let herself be led away to another exam room. Sarah stayed with Tyler and Grace, telling them stories about flying and answering Tyler's endless questions about how the A-10 worked. An hour later, when the doctor had cleared everyone and they were preparing to leave, Colonel Vance appeared in the medical center. "Captain Mitchell, a word." Sarah's stomach tightened, but she followed the colonel into a private consultation room. Vance closed the door and turned to face her. "I just got a call from the emergency management office in Copper Creek. They wanted to know who flew that A-10 over the town. When I told them it was you conducting an unauthorized rescue, you know what they said." Sarah shook her head. "They said you saved more than just 2 children. They said seeing that aircraft overhead, knowing the military was watching, knowing someone was trying to help, it gave people hope. It kept them from panicking. Several families climbed to their roofs and waited for rescue because they'd seen your plane and thought help was coming. And help did come eventually. The Guard sent helicopters as soon as the weather cleared. They got everyone out." Vance paused, studying Sarah's face. "The emergency director said to tell you thank you. He said you're a hero." "I'm not a hero," Sarah said quietly. "I'm just a pilot who couldn't leave her family behind." "Those two things aren't mutually exclusive." Vance was quiet for a moment. "I'm still required to proceed with the investigation. That hasn't changed. But I wanted you to know that what you did today mattered, not just to your niece and nephew, to a lot of people." "Does that mean I won't face charges?" "I don't know yet," Vance admitted. "This is complicated. Higher-ups are involved, but for what it's worth, if I had to make the choice you made today, I hope I'd have the courage to do the same thing." She left without another word, leaving Sarah standing alone in the small room. The next 3 days were a blur. The storm passed, but the damage it left behind was immense. Copper Creek was devastated. Houses destroyed, roads washed out, the downtown area buried under mud and debris. The official death toll was 14, but everyone knew it would have been much higher without the evacuation. Sarah was confined to base, ordered not to speak to the media. That didn't stop the media from speaking about her. Somehow the story leaked. The female pilot who disobeyed orders to save her family, who flew through a hurricane in a military jet, who landed on a farm field and walked through a flood. News vans appeared outside the base gates. Reporters called constantly. The reactions were split. Some people called her a hero, someone who embodied the best values of military service, protecting the innocent no matter the personal cost. Others called her reckless, a pilot who put herself and government property at risk for personal reasons. Military analysts debated whether her actions set a dangerous precedent. Politicians weighed in with their opinions. Through it all, Sarah reported for duty every day, pushing papers and answering phones in the operations office. It was humiliating. She could see the other pilots flying training missions, hear the A-10s taking off and landing. But she couldn't fly. That was the worst part, being so close to what she loved but unable to touch it. Major Hastings made sure she knew how he felt. He found reasons to walk past her desk, always with some comment about protocol or discipline. Other officers were more sympathetic, but they couldn't say so openly. The investigation was ongoing. Taking Sarah's side might hurt their own careers. On the 4th day after the storm, Sarah was called to testify before the investigating board. It consisted of 3 senior officers from the State National Guard headquarters. They asked detailed questions about her decision-making process, her assessment of the risk, her understanding of the regulations she'd violated. Sarah answered honestly. Yes, she had known it was against orders. Yes, she had understood the risk. Yes, she had made a conscious choice to prioritize saving her family over following regulations. No, she wasn't sorry. "Captain Mitchell," one of the officers said, "you understand that military discipline requires following orders, even when we disagree with them." "Yes, sir." "And you understand that if every service member made individual decisions about which orders to follow, we would have chaos." "Yes, sir." "Then help me understand why you thought you were exempt from these principles." Sarah chose her words carefully. "I didn't think I was exempt, sir. I knew there would be consequences, but I also knew that 2 children would die if I didn't act. In that moment, I had to choose between being a good soldier and being a good person. I chose to be a good person. I'll accept whatever punishment that requires." The officers looked at each other. One of them made a note on his tablet. "You're aware that your actions are being used by some to argue against women in combat roles?" Another officer asked. "Yes, sir." "Does that concern you?" Sarah met his eyes. "Sir, with respect, that's not fair. Male pilots have disobeyed orders before. There are stories about it going back to World War II. When men break rules to save lives, they get medals and promotions. When a woman does it, suddenly it's proof that women can't handle the responsibility. That's a double standard, and we all know it. The room was silent. Finally, the senior officer nodded. "Thank you for your testimony, Captain. We'll take your statement under advisement. You're dismissed." Sarah returned to her desk, not knowing what to expect. Would they court-martial her, ground her permanently, kick her out of the guard entirely? All she could do was wait. That evening, as she was preparing to leave for the day, her phone rang. It was Emma. "Turn on the TV," her sister said. "Channel 7 right now." Sarah found a television in the break room and switched to Channel 7. A news broadcast was showing footage of Copper Creek during the storm, then cut to an interview with a middle-aged man Sarah recognized as Dan Mercer, the town's emergency management director. "There's been a lot of talk about Captain Mitchell's actions," Mercer was saying to the reporter. "Some people questioning whether she did the right thing, but I want to be very clear about something. What Captain Mitchell did saved lives, not just her niece and nephew, but possibly dozens of other people. When folks in Copper Creek saw that A-10 flying overhead, it gave them hope. It made them believe that help was coming. That hope kept people calm when they might have panicked. It kept them on their roofs waiting for rescue instead of trying to drive through floodwaters. Her actions had a ripple effect that we're still measuring." "But critics say she violated regulations," the reporter pressed. "That she put herself and government property at risk." "I'm a veteran," Mercer interrupted. 20 years in the Army, and I'll tell you something about regulations. They exist to guide us, not to handcuff us. When you're in a crisis, you need people who can think, who can make hard decisions, who can do what's necessary even when it's difficult. That's what Captain Mitchell did. She saw people in danger and she acted. That's not recklessness, that's courage. The interview continued, with Mercer defending Sarah's actions in clear, forceful terms. When it ended, the news anchor noted that similar sentiments were being expressed by other Copper Creek residents and by veterans groups across the state. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "The whole town supports you. Everyone's calling the base, writing to the governor. You're not alone in this." Maybe not, but Sarah still didn't know if support from civilians would be enough to save her career. Colonel Vance called Sarah into her office on a gray Wednesday morning. The storm had passed almost a week ago, but the aftermath still dominated the news. Copper Creek was slowly recovering, though it would take months to rebuild. The investigation into Sarah's actions had concluded, and now it was time to face the judgment. Sarah entered the office expecting the worst. Instead, she found Colonel Vance behind her desk with papers spread in front of her, and sitting in the guest chairs were two people Sarah didn't recognize: a stern-looking man in a suit and a female general she'd seen before in official photographs. Brigadier General Helen Cortez, the state adjutant general, commander of the entire Tennessee National Guard. Sarah snapped to attention and saluted. "At ease, Captain," General Cortez said. "Sit down, we need to talk." Sarah sat, her heart pounding. This was it. A general didn't show up personally unless the situation was serious. They were probably going to court-martial her, end her career, maybe even press criminal charges for theft of government property. "Captain Mitchell," General Cortez began, "I've reviewed the findings of the investigating board. I've read the testimonies. I've spoken with Colonel Vance, with the emergency management director in Copper Creek, and with several other relevant parties. I've also received approximately 400 emails and letters regarding your actions during the storm. Do you know what the majority of those letters said?" "No, ma'am. They said you're a hero. They said you represent the best of what the National Guard stands for: protecting civilians, serving your community, putting others before yourself. Several of them came from veterans who said they would have done exactly what you did." Sarah didn't know how to respond to that, so she stayed silent. "However," the general continued, and Sarah's hope deflated, "I've also received input from people who believe what you did was reckless and sets a dangerous precedent. Major Hastings filed a formal complaint arguing that you should be dismissed from the Guard. Several senior officers have expressed concern about maintaining discipline and good order." The man in the suit spoke up for the first time. "I'm Edward Morrison, legal counsel for the Adjutant General's office. Captain Mitchell, the regulations you violated are not minor. Unauthorized use of military equipment, disobeying direct orders, flying in restricted airspace without clearance. Any one of these could result in a court-martial. Combined, they present a serious case." "I understand, sir," Sarah said quietly. "But," Morrison continued, "we also have to consider the context. You were responding to what you reasonably believed was a life-threatening emergency involving family members. You had attempted to make contact through official channels and received no response. You made a judgment call that, while technically illegal, resulted in saving lives. General Cortez leaned forward. Here's my dilemma, Captain. If I punish you harshly, I'm sending a message that following regulations is more important than saving lives. That's not a message I want to send. But if I don't punish you at all, I'm sending a message that orders are optional. That's also not a message I want to send, so I have to find a middle ground. Yes, ma'am. The investigating board recommended that you receive a letter of reprimand in your personnel file. That's the official punishment. The letter will note that while your actions saved lives, they also violated regulations, and such violations cannot be tolerated regardless of outcome. A letter of reprimand, not great but not terrible. It would hurt her chances of promotion, but she'd still have a career. Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. However, General Cortez said, that's not the end of this story. Major Hastings and some others are pushing for you to be discharged. They're arguing that keeping you in the Guard sends the wrong message about discipline. And I'll be honest with you, Captain, there's political pressure behind that argument. Some people in the state legislature and in the Pentagon would like to see you made an example of. The hope flickered and died. I see. I don't agree with them, the general said flatly. I think losing a pilot of your caliber would be a mistake, but I'm not the only voice in this decision. There are people above me who have opinions. So what happens now? Sarah asked. Colonel Vance spoke for the first time. You're being reassigned. Ma'am, the situation at Whitlow has become untenable, Vance explained. Major Hastings has made it clear he doesn't want to work with you. Some of the other pilots are uncomfortable with the situation. And frankly, every time you walk out on that flight line, it's going to remind everyone of what happened. We need to give things time to settle. Where am I being reassigned? Shaw Air Force Base, South Carolina, General Cortez said. Active duty assignment, 6-month tour. You'll be flying with a different unit, away from the politics here in Tennessee. It gives you a chance to prove yourself in a neutral environment. It also gets you out of the spotlight while things calm down. Sarah tried to process this. Shaw Air Force Base, active duty. It wasn't a dismissal, but it wasn't exactly a vote of confidence either. They were basically exiling her. Is this voluntary, ma'am? Sarah asked. Technically, yes, Cortez said. But I strongly recommend you accept. The alternative is staying here and fighting this battle every day. Some people will never let it go. They'll use every opportunity to undermine you. Going to Shaw gives you a fresh start. And if I do well there? If you do well, you come back to Tennessee with a clean slate. The reprimand stays in your file, but we move forward. You continue your career. And if I don't do well? Cortez's expression hardened. Then the people who want you gone will have ammunition. Don't give them ammunition, Captain. Sarah sat back, her mind spinning. Leave Tennessee, leave Emma and the kids, leave everything familiar. But staying meant fighting a war she probably couldn't win. At least at Shaw, she'd be flying. She'd be in an A-10 cockpit again. I'll go, Sarah said. Good, Cortez stood, and everyone else stood with her. You report to Shaw in 1 week. Use that time to get your affairs in order. Colonel Vance will provide your orders and assignment details. The general started to leave, then paused. Captain Mitchell, one more thing. What you did during that storm took courage. Not everyone has that. Don't lose it even when people question you. The Guard needs officers who can make hard decisions. Just try to make them within the regulations next time. She left, Morrison following. Colonel Vance waited until the door closed, then sat back down and gestured for Sarah to do the same. You're getting railroaded, Vance said bluntly. You know that, right? Yes, ma'am. Hastings is making this personal. He's using his connections to push you out. The general is trying to protect you by sending you away, but make no mistake, this is exile. I understand. Vance studied her. Why did you really do it, Sarah? And don't give me the official line about family emergency. I want the truth. Sarah thought about how to answer. Finally, she said, because I've spent my whole career trying to prove I belong, trying to show that I'm as good as any male pilot, trying to earn respect. But that day, none of that mattered. My family was in danger. And I realized that all the respect in the world, all the medals and commendations and attaboys, they mean nothing if I'm not willing to use my skills to protect the people I love. That's what I thought, Vance said. For what it's worth, I would have done the same thing, but I've been in the military long enough to know that sometimes doing the right thing costs you. You're paying that cost now. Will I ever stop paying it? Maybe, if you keep your head down, do your job at Shaw, come back here in 6 months and fly the line like nothing happened. Eventually people will forget. Or at least, they'll find something new to talk about. And if they don't forget? Vance didn't have an answer for that. The next week passed in a blur of out-processing paperwork, medical checks, and packing. Sarah said goodbye to Ray Torres, who shook her hand and told her she was the best pilot he'd ever worked with. She attended a brief ceremony where Colonel Vance officially awarded her the reprimand letter, a surreal experience, being formally punished while half the people in the room were quietly supportive. Major Hastings attended the ceremony with a satisfied smile. He caught Sarah in the hallway afterward. "South Carolina," he said. "I hear it's hot there, hope you enjoy it." "I'll manage," Sarah replied. "You know what I think. I think you got off easy. You should have been court-martialed. You should have lost your wings." "But I didn't." "No," Hastings stepped closer. "But you're gone, that's what matters. Whitlow doesn't need pilots who think they're above the rules. We need professionals, disciplined, reliable professionals, not cowboys, and definitely not cowgirls playing hero." Sarah met his eyes. "Is that what this is really about? The fact that I disobeyed orders? Or is it about the fact that I'm a woman who proved she could do something you never could?" Hastings's face flushed red. "You didn't prove anything except that women are too emotional to be trusted in combat aircraft." "I saved 2 kids. What have you done lately besides push paper and polish your medals?" "I follow orders," Hastings snapped. "I maintain discipline. I uphold the standards that people like you are eroding. Every woman who gets handed a flight slot because of diversity quotas makes this organization weaker. You just proved my point." Sarah felt anger rising but forced it down. Getting into a shouting match with Hastings wouldn't help anything. "I earned my slot the same way you earned yours. I'm just better at using it." She walked away before he could respond, but she could feel his glare burning into her back. The hardest goodbye was to Emma and the kids. Sarah drove to Copper Creek on her last day before heading to Shaw. The town was still recovering, piles of debris on curbs, damaged buildings being torn down, FEMA trailers parked in yards. But life was returning. People were rebuilding. Emma's house had suffered water damage, and she was staying with friends while repairs were made. Tyler and Grace ran to Sarah when she arrived, wrapping themselves around her legs. "You're leaving?" Tyler asked, his voice small. "Just for a little while," Sarah said, kneeling to his level. 6 months, then I'll be back." "Because of us?" Tyler's eyes were wide. "Are you in trouble because you saved us?" Sarah pulled him into a hug. "Listen to me. What happened is complicated, and yes, some people aren't happy with me right now, but none of that is your fault. You and Grace are the best thing in my life. Never forget that." Grace climbed into Sarah's arms. "I don't want you to go." "I know, sweetie. I don't want to go either. But sometimes grown-ups have to do things they don't want to do. It's called responsibility." Emma stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, tears on her cheeks. After the kids ran off to play, she pulled Sarah into a fierce hug. "This is so unfair," Emma said. "You saved lives. You should be getting a medal, not a punishment." "The military doesn't work that way." "Then the military is stupid." Sarah laughed despite herself. "Yeah, sometimes it is." "Will you really come back, or is this their way of getting rid of you?" "I'll come back," Sarah promised. "I'm not done yet, not by a long shot." She left Copper Creek as the sun was setting, the town growing smaller in her rearview mirror. Part of her wondered if she'd ever really come back, or if this was the end of her Tennessee career. But dwelling on that wouldn't help. She had to focus on Shaw, on proving herself all over again. The drive to South Carolina took 8 hours. Shaw Air Force Base sat outside Sumter, surrounded by pine forests and southern humidity. Sarah reported to the guard gate with her orders and was directed to the temporary lodging facility. She'd be living on base for the duration of her assignment. The next morning, she reported to the 20th Fighter Wing headquarters. An administrative officer processed her paperwork and gave her a brief overview of her assignment. She'd be flying with the 77th Fighter Squadron, known as the Gamblers. Her role would be to augment their pilot roster and provide experience in close air support operations. The squadron commander wants to see you at 1300 hours, the admin officer said. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, he's been briefed on your situation. Of course he had. Sarah thanked the officer and spent the morning finding her way around the base. Shaw was much larger than Whitlow, a sprawling complex of hangars, offices, and support facilities. The flight line held dozens of A-10s, all bearing the distinctive nose art of various squadrons. At exactly 1300 hours, Sarah presented herself at the squadron commander's office. Lieutenant Colonel Webb was a compact man in his mid-40s with graying hair and sharp eyes. He invited her to sit without ceremony. "Captain Mitchell," Webb began, "I've read your file. I know what happened in Tennessee. I know you're here as much to get you out of a political situation as to augment my squadron. I want to be clear about something up front. I don't care about any of that. I care about whether you can fly and whether you can integrate with my team. Can you do those things?" "Yes, sir." "Good, because I'm going to give you a fair shot, but only one shot. Some of my pilots have heard the stories about you. They're going to be watching to see if you're the hero the news made you out to be or the problem child that some people claim. You'll have to prove yourself to them. I can't do that for you." "I understand, sir." "One more thing," Webb's expression softened slightly. "What you did for your family took guts, I respect that, but it also created problems. My advice? Focus on the mission, don't try to be a hero, just be a solid pilot who does her job, that's how you'll win people over." "Yes, sir." "All right, get settled in. You start flying the schedule in 2 days, dismissed." Sarah left the office feeling cautiously optimistic. Webb seemed fair, at least. That was more than she'd had at Whitlow toward the end. The next 2 days were spent getting qualified on Shaw's local procedures and meeting the other pilots in the squadron. The reactions were mixed. Some were welcoming, curious about her combat experience. Others were distant, clearly reserving judgment. A few were openly skeptical. One pilot in particular, Captain Brad Simmons, made his feelings clear during a briefing. "So you're the one who stole an A-10 to play rescue mission," Simmons said, loud enough for half the room to hear. Sarah kept her voice even. "I conducted an emergency extraction of civilians in imminent danger." "That's a fancy way of saying you disobeyed orders." "It's an accurate way of describing what happened." Simmons leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Must be nice being able to pick and choose which orders you follow. Some of us don't have that luxury." "I faced consequences for my actions," Sarah said. "I'm here, aren't I?" "Yeah, you're here, taking up a slot that could go to someone who actually respects the chain of command." Before Sarah could respond, another pilot spoke up. "Give it a rest, Simmons. She's here, she's qualified, that's all that matters." The speaker was a woman, a major named Rachel Kim. She gave Sarah a slight nod. Sarah nodded back, grateful for the support. The briefing continued, but Sarah could feel the tension in the room. This was going to be harder than she'd thought. Her first flight at Shaw was a training sortie, a basic proficiency check to ensure she could operate safely in the local airspace. She flew with Webb himself as her flight lead. They took off at dawn, the A-10s climbing into the pink morning sky. Flying with Webb was a revelation. The man was an artist in the cockpit, smooth and precise. He pushed Sarah through a series of tactical scenarios, testing her reaction time, her weapons employment procedures, her ability to navigate under pressure. Sarah performed well, falling back on years of experience and training. After they landed, Webb pulled her aside on the flight line. "You're good," he said simply. "Really good. I don't know what the situation was in Tennessee, but whatever the politics, you can fly. That's what matters to me." "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet. You've still got to prove yourself to the squadron, and they're going to test you. Just keep doing what you did up there and you'll be fine." Over the next few weeks, Sarah flew constantly. Training missions, night flights, close air support exercises with ground units. She threw herself into the work, determined to prove that she belonged. Some of the pilots started to warm to her. Others, like Simmons, remained hostile. The breakthrough came during a large-scale training exercise. The squadron was providing support for an Army brigade conducting a simulated assault on an enemy position. Sarah was assigned as part of a 4-ship formation tasked with suppressing enemy armor. The exercise was going smoothly until one of the Army units ran into unexpected trouble. Their scenario involved a platoon pinned down by simulated enemy fire, taking casualties. The planned close air support was delayed due to airspace coordination issues. On the ground, the training became dangerously real as soldiers struggled to extract their wounded from the hot zone. Sarah was holding overhead when she heard the distress call. Any air assets, this is Chaos 2-6. We have casualties and need immediate CAS. Our timeline is critical, how copy? The mission commander responded that they were working the airspace deconfliction, but it would take time. Sarah looked down at the training area. She could see the Army unit clearly marked vehicles stuck in the impact area. Without hesitation, Sarah made her call. Chaos 2-6, Gambler 3-4, I can be on station in 2 minutes, send coordinates. Gambler 3-4, you're not cleared into that airspace, the mission commander said sharply. Sarah knew he was right, but she also knew that in a real combat situation, soldiers were dying while bureaucrats argued about airspace. This was training, yes, but it was training for real scenarios. Understood, Sarah replied, pushing anyway. She broke formation and dove toward the coordinates, mentally calculating her approach. The mission commander was yelling at her over the radio, ordering her to return to station. Sarah ignored him. She rolled in on the target area and executed a perfect simulated gun run, marking the enemy positions for the ground unit. Then she pulled up and provided overwatch while the Army platoon completed their extraction. Gambler 3-4, outstanding support, Chaos 2-6 called. That's exactly what we needed, thanks for the save. Sarah rejoined her formation as the mission commander's voice crackled in her headset. Gambler 3-4, return to base, immediately. The flight back was silent. Sarah knew she was in trouble again. She'd violated the training airspace procedures. She'd ignored direct orders from the mission commander. Once again, she'd chosen action over protocol. When she landed, Webb was waiting on the flight line. His face was unreadable. My office now. Lieutenant Colonel Webb's office was sparse and functional, dominated by maps and flight schedules. Sarah stood at attention while Webb sat behind his desk, fingers steepled, studying her in silence. The wait was deliberate, letting her stew. Finally, Webb spoke. Tell me what you were thinking up there. Sir, I heard a unit calling for help. They needed immediate support. The airspace deconfliction was taking too long. In a real combat situation, people would have died while we sorted out paperwork. This wasn't a real combat situation, Captain. It was training. Training has rules for a reason, so we don't have mid-air collisions, so we don't hurt people on the ground, so we maintain discipline. Yes, sir, but... Let me finish. Webb's voice was sharp. You've been at Shaw for 3 weeks, and you've already decided that your judgment supersedes the mission commander's authority. Do you see the pattern here? Sarah felt her stomach drop. Sir, I was trying to... I know what you were trying to do, and I know your history. The problem is, Captain, you seem to have a habit of deciding which rules apply to you. That's a problem. A big problem. Webb stood and walked to his window, looking out at the flight line. The mission commander wants you grounded. He says you're a safety risk. He's formally requesting that I send you back to Tennessee and recommend you be discharged from the Guard. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Discharged. After everything she'd done, all the years of service, it would end like this. Sir, please. Webb held up a hand. I told him no. Sarah stopped mid-sentence. Sir. I told him no, Webb repeated, turning back to face her. You want to know why? Because I talked to Chaos 2-6 after the flight, the Army lieutenant. You know what he said. Sarah shook her head. He said that in his experience, the difference between a training accident and a successful exercise is pilots who understand what it's like on the ground. He said your support was exactly what they needed, delivered exactly when they needed it. He said if he ever deploys again, he wants you covering his soldiers. Webb returned to his desk. Here's the thing, Mitchell. You're right that in combat, sometimes you have to break protocols to save lives. But we're not in combat right now. We're training. And if you can't follow the rules during training, how can anyone trust you to make good decisions when lives are actually on the line? I understand, sir. Do you? Because I'm not sure you do. I think you've convinced yourself that you're some kind of maverick, someone who sees the bigger picture while everyone else is worried about paperwork. But that's not how this works. The chain of command exists for a reason. Trust exists for a reason. And every time you decide you know better than the people in charge, you erode that trust. Webb pulled out a file and opened it. I've been reading more about what happened in Tennessee, not just the official reports. I talked to some people who were there. Do you know what they told me? No, sir. They told me that you're one of the best A-10 pilots they've ever seen. They told me you have instincts that can't be taught, that you can read a tactical situation faster than almost anyone. They also told me that you have a problem with authority, that you don't play well with others, and that you always think you're the smartest person in the room. Sarah wanted to argue, but Webb continued before she could speak. Here's my assessment. You're skilled, Mitchell, maybe even brilliant. But skill without discipline is dangerous. I've seen pilots like you before. They're usually fearless, talented, and they usually end up dead or discharged because they can't accept limitations. I don't think I'm above limitations, sir. Then prove it. Here's what's going to happen. You're getting another letter of counseling in your file regarding today's incident. You're also going to stand down from flight status for 1 week. Sir, please. 1 week, Webb said firmly. During that week, you're going to attend every briefing, every training session, every safety meeting. You're going to listen. You're going to learn how this squadron operates. And you're going to think long and hard about whether you want a career in military aviation or whether you want to be the person everyone tells stories about who flamed out because she couldn't follow orders. I want a career, sir. Then act like it. Dismissed. Sarah left the office feeling like she'd been punched. Another letter of counseling, another setback, another mark against her record. She was digging herself a hole and she didn't know how to stop. The week on the ground was torture. Sarah attended every briefing as ordered. She listened to safety lectures. She sat through training sessions about airspace management and coordination procedures, and she watched other pilots fly while she remained grounded. The squadron's reaction to her punishment was mixed. Some pilots, like Simmons, were openly pleased. Guess the Tennessee cowgirl isn't quite as sharp as she thought, Simmons said during one lunch break, loud enough for Sarah to hear. Major Kim, who had become something of an ally, shot him a look. Give it a rest, Brad. We've all made mistakes. Not mistakes like that, Simmons replied. Most of us learned to follow orders before we got our wings. Sarah stayed quiet, remembering Webb's words about discipline. Starting a fight wouldn't help anything. But the isolation was wearing on her. She'd left Tennessee to escape the politics and judgment, only to find more of the same at Shaw. Every day she felt more like an outsider, like someone who didn't belong. On the third day of her stand-down, Sarah was walking back to her quarters when she heard someone call her name. She turned to find an older man in civilian clothes approaching. He was probably in his 60s, with white hair and a deeply lined face. Captain Mitchell, I'm Tom Bradley. I was hoping we could talk. I'm sorry, sir, but I'm not authorized to speak to the press. Bradley smiled. I'm not press. I'm retired Air Force. Flew A-10s back in the day before you were probably born. I heard through the grapevine that you were stationed here and I wanted to meet you. Sarah relaxed slightly. I'm not sure I'm very good company right now, sir. Call me Tom, and I think you're exactly the company I'm looking for. There's a diner off base that makes decent coffee. Can I buy you a cup? Sarah hesitated, then nodded. Why not? The diner was a classic Southern establishment with vinyl booths and a cheerful waitress who called everyone Hun. Tom ordered coffee for both of them, then settled back and studied Sarah. You've had a rough few months, he said. That's one way to put it. I read about what happened in Tennessee. The storm, your sister's kids, the unauthorized flight, must have been quite a decision. It was the only decision I could make. Tom nodded. I believe you. I also believe you've been catching hell for it ever since. Why did you want to meet me? Sarah asked. No offense, sir, Tom, but I'm guessing this isn't just a social call. You're right. I wanted to meet you because I think I understand what you're going through. See, back in 1991, during Desert Storm, I was flying A-10s in Iraq. My squadron was tasked with supporting an army unit that got cut off during the ground offensive. They were taking heavy fire, running low on ammunition, and our command was debating whether to send helicopters or wait for ground reinforcement. Tom took a sip of his coffee. I was overhead with a full load of ordnance. I could see enemy armor moving to surround the army unit, and I knew that if I waited for authorization to engage, those soldiers were going to die, so I didn't wait. I rolled in hot and took out the enemy armor. What happened? I saved about 30 soldiers. Also got my ass chewed by my commanding officer, received a formal reprimand, and spent the next 6 months wondering if I'd destroyed my career. Tom smiled. They gave me a silver star eventually, but the reprimand stayed in my file. The message was clear. I'd done the right thing the wrong way. So you understand, Sarah said quietly. I do, and I want to tell you something important. You're going to face a choice in the next few months. You can let this break you, let all the criticism and punishment wear you down until you either quit or become so cautious that you lose what makes you special. Or you can learn from it and become better. How do I do that? By understanding that being a great pilot isn't just about stick-and-rudder skills. It's about judgment. It's about knowing when to push and when to hold back. It's about building trust with the people around you so that when you do need to break the rules, they'll support you instead of undermining you. Tom leaned forward. Right now, you're fighting everyone, your commanders, your fellow pilots, the system. You're exhausting yourself trying to prove that you're right and they're wrong. But that's not sustainable. Eventually, you'll burn out. So what should I do differently? Stop trying to be the hero. Start trying to be part of the team. Listen to the people around you. Build relationships. Show them that you're not a maverick or a problem child, but a skilled professional who made a hard choice in an impossible situation. Give them a reason to trust you. And if they won't, if they've already decided I'm trouble? Tom shrugged. Then you change their minds through actions, not arguments. You do your job so well that they can't ignore you. You become so valuable that they'd be crazy to let you go. That's how you win this fight, not by being defiant, but by being indispensable. They talked for another hour. Tom shared stories from his own career, the mistakes he'd made, the lessons he'd learned. Sarah found herself relaxing, opening up in a way she hadn't with anyone since leaving Tennessee. When they finally left the diner, Tom shook her hand. You've got something special, Captain. Don't waste it on anger. Use it to be the pilot you're capable of being. How do I know what kind of pilot that is? You'll know when you stop fighting against the system and start working within it. Not because you're giving up or selling out, but because you've realized that the mission is bigger than your ego. Sarah thought about Tom's words for the rest of her stand-down period. She attended the briefings and training sessions, but this time she really listened. She started to see the reasoning behind the procedures she'd always thought were bureaucratic nonsense. She began to understand that coordination and discipline weren't obstacles to success. They were the foundation that made success possible. When she returned to flight status, something had shifted. Sarah was still the same skilled pilot, still had the same instincts and abilities, but she approached her missions differently. She communicated more, coordinated better, worked harder to integrate with the other pilots rather than operating independently. Slowly, the squadron began to warm to her. Simmons was still hostile, but others started including her in their planning sessions, asking for her input, treating her like a peer rather than an outsider. Major Kim pulled her aside after a particularly successful training mission. You're doing better, Mitchell. People are noticing. Thanks, I'm trying. It shows, keep it up. 2 months into her Shaw assignment, the squadron received orders for a major exercise at the Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. It would be a massive operation involving multiple services, testing their ability to coordinate complex air-ground operations. The best pilots from each squadron would be selected to participate. Sarah desperately wanted to go. Nellis was the premier training center for fighter aviation. Being selected would be validation that she'd turned things around, that people saw her as a valuable asset rather than a problem. When the roster was announced, Sarah's name was on it. Don't screw this up, Lieutenant Colonel Webb told her. This is your chance to show everyone what you can do. Make the most of it. The exercise at Nellis was intense. They flew multiple sorties per day, engaging in complex scenarios that tested every aspect of their training. Sarah flew flawlessly, executing missions with precision and working seamlessly with the other pilots. On the 4th day of the exercise, Sarah's flight was tasked with providing close air support for a simulated special operations mission. They would be working with a SEAL team conducting a hostage rescue deep in enemy territory. The mission brief was detailed. The SEAL team would infiltrate the target compound, secure the hostages, and extract to a pickup zone. Sarah's flight would provide overwatch and be ready to suppress any enemy reinforcements. Timing was critical. The entire operation had to be completed within a tight window. Everything went according to plan until the SEAL team reached the compound. Then the scenario changed. The exercise controllers threw in a complication, additional enemy forces that weren't in the original brief, converging on the compound faster than expected. The SEAL team leader's voice came over the radio, tense and urgent. All air assets, Razor 1-1. We have enemy armor inbound, estimate 10 vehicles. They'll be on top of us in 5 minutes. We need immediate suppression. Sarah looked at her tactical display. The enemy vehicles were marked clearly, but they were close to the compound, too close. Engaging them with the A-10's gun risked hitting the SEAL team. The flight lead hesitated, clearly running calculations. 5 minutes was an eternity in combat, but making the wrong call could mean friendly casualties. Sarah keyed her mic. Lead 3-4, I have a solution. Send it 3-4. I can take a northern approach, use the terrain to mask my run. Put cannon fire on the enemy vehicles while staying clear of the compound. But I'll need to go low, below the controlled airspace floor. There was a pause. Going below the airspace floor violated the exercise rules. But it was exactly the kind of creative thinking that separated good pilots from great ones. Do it, the flight lead ordered. I'll cover high. Sarah rolled in, dropping below the minimum altitude and using a ravine to shield her approach. The enemy vehicles appeared in her targeting system. She squeezed the trigger, and the A-10's gun roared, the distinctive BRRRRRT sound that made the Warthog famous. Simulated hits registered on the enemy vehicles. The SEAL team completed their extraction, the mission succeeded, and Sarah pulled up and rejoined her flight. Back on the ground, the debrief was electric. The exercise controllers praised Sarah's creative solution. The SEAL team leader shook her hand and said she'd saved the mission. Even the flight lead, a crusty major with 20 years of experience, admitted it was some of the best flying he'd seen. But afterward, Captain Simmons found her in the hallway. Nice flying, Mitchell. Shame you had to violate the airspace floor to do it. Sarah stopped and turned. It was a tactical decision. The flight lead approved it. Of course he did. You've got everyone snowed with your hotshot moves, but some of us see through it. You're still the same pilot who can't follow the rules. You just got lucky that it worked out this time. Simmons, what is your problem with me? My problem? He stepped closer. My problem is that pilots like you make the rest of us look bad. You think that because you're willing to break rules, you're somehow braver or more skilled. But all you're doing is creating risk. One day, your luck is going to run out, and when it does, you'll take someone else with you. That's not fair. Isn't it? You stole a plane in Tennessee. You violated training airspace at Shaw. Now you're bending rules at Nellie's. You have a pattern, Mitchell, and patterns don't lie. He walked away, leaving Sarah standing alone in the hallway, his words echoing in her mind. Was he right? Was she really just a reckless pilot who got lucky? Or was she someone who understood that sometimes the mission required accepting risk? Sarah didn't have an answer. All she knew was that she was tired of fighting, tired of defending herself, tired of never quite being good enough in the eyes of people like Simmons and Hastings. That night she sat in her temporary quarters at Nellie's and thought about her career. She'd accomplished so much, combat deployments, medals, thousands of flight hours. But it never seemed to be enough. There was always someone ready to question her, to doubt her, to suggest she didn't belong. Maybe they were right. Maybe she should just give up, resign her commission, and find something else to do with her life. Something where she wouldn't have to constantly prove herself. Her phone rang. It was Emma. Hey, Sarah, how's Nevada? It's fine, Sarah said, trying to sound upbeat. Hot. You sound tired. Just a long day. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Tyler asked about you today, wanted to know when you're coming home. I told him a couple more months. Yeah, assuming they let me come back. What does that mean? Sarah sighed. Nothing, I'm just having a rough time here, starting to wonder if all this is worth it. Sarah Marie Mitchell, you listen to me. Emma's voice was fierce. You are the bravest person I know. You saved my children's lives. You've served your country with honor. Don't you dare let anyone make you feel like you're not good enough. Easy for you to say. You're not the one everyone's judging. No, I'm just the one whose kids would be dead without you. Remember that. When people question you or put you down, remember that Tyler and Grace are alive because you had the courage to do what was necessary. After they hung up, Sarah sat in the dark and thought about Emma's words. Her sister was right. She'd saved lives. She'd done good things. Maybe the cost had been high, but the alternative, letting fear and rules and other people's opinions control her, that wasn't acceptable either. Sarah made a decision. She wasn't going to quit. She wasn't going to let people like Simmons and Hastings define her. She would finish her assignment at Shaw, return to Tennessee, and continue her career. And she would do it her way, skilled, disciplined, but never afraid to make the hard choices when they mattered. The next morning, she flew her final Nellie's sortie with renewed determination. And when the exercise concluded, she received a commendation from the exercise commander for exceptional performance. It wasn't enough to erase the doubts and criticisms, but it was a start. Part 5. Sarah returned to Shaw Air Force Base with a new sense of purpose. The Nellie's exercise had shown her that she could excel within the system if she played it smart. She still had 3 months left on her Shaw assignment, and she intended to make them count. Lieutenant Colonel Webb called her into his office the day after she returned. "Captain Mitchell, I received the reports from Nellie's. Outstanding work. The exercise commander specifically mentioned you in his debrief to the wing commander." "Thank you, sir. I'm putting you forward for an upgrade to instructor pilot. You've got the skills, and I think teaching others will help you develop the leadership qualities you need. What do you think?" Sarah was stunned. Instructor pilot was a significant responsibility and a mark of trust. "I'd be honored, sir." "Good, training starts next month. In the meantime, I've got a special project for you." Webb pulled out a folder. "We've been asked to develop a new close air support training module focused on urban operations. I want you to lead the development team. You'll work with our tactics shop and coordinate with the Army to make sure we're training for realistic scenarios." It was exactly the kind of challenge Sarah needed. Over the next weeks, she threw herself into the project, working long hours to develop training scenarios that would prepare pilots for the complexities of urban combat. She coordinated with Army units at nearby Fort Jackson, learning about their tactics and requirements. The work brought her into contact with Major Rachel Kim more frequently. Kim was the squadron's chief of tactics, responsible for developing training programs. They spent hours discussing scenarios, debating approaches, and refining the training modules. One evening, working late in the tactics shop, Kim leaned back in her chair and studied Sarah. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Sure. Why do you care so much about the flying, the mission, all of it? Most pilots do their jobs and go home, but you live this stuff. Why?" Sarah thought about how to answer. "When I was a kid growing up in Copper Creek, my dad used to take me to the county airport to watch planes. He was a mechanic, worked on cars mostly, but he loved aviation. He'd tell me stories about fighters and bombers, about pilots who did impossible things." She paused, remembering. "He died when I was 12, heart attack, sudden. And I remember standing at his funeral thinking that he'd never got to do the things he dreamed about. He talked about learning to fly someday, but someday never came. So I decided I wouldn't make that mistake. I'd chase my dreams while I had the chance." "That's why you became a pilot." "That's why I became this kind of pilot. The kind who takes risks, who pushes boundaries. Because I know how short life can be, and I don't want to get to the end and wonder what I could have accomplished if I'd been braver." Kim nodded slowly. "That makes sense, but it's also dangerous, Sarah. That mindset, the one that says you have to push every limit, it can get you killed or grounded." "I'm learning that," Sarah admitted. "Tennessee taught me. Shaw is teaching me. I'm trying to find a balance between being bold and being smart." "Are you finding it?" "I don't know yet, but I'm working on it." They worked in comfortable silence for a while longer, then Kim said, "For what it's worth, I think you're good for the squadron. You shake things up. Make people think differently. We need that." "Tell that to Simmons." Kim laughed. "Simmons is never going to like you. He's too invested in maintaining the status quo. But he's not everyone. Most of the pilots respect you now. They've seen what you can do. That's what matters." The instructor pilot training was intense. Sarah had to learn not just how to fly, but how to teach others to fly. She studied educational theory, practiced giving effective feedback, and learned to break down complex maneuvers into teachable steps. Her first student was a young lieutenant fresh out of flight school, eager but inexperienced. Teaching him forced Sarah to articulate things she'd always done instinctively. It made her a better pilot and a more thoughtful person. 3 months into her Shaw assignment, Sarah received a call from Colonel Vance back in Tennessee. "Captain Mitchell, I wanted to give you an update. The situation here has evolved. Major Hastings has been transferred. He's taking a staff job at the state headquarters." "Transferred?" Sarah was surprised. "Why?" "Let's just say his management style wasn't working well with several people, not just you. The wing needed a change. His replacement is someone you know, Lieutenant Colonel Jennifer Hayes. She was the operations officer at Murfreesboro. She's practical, fair, and she's looking forward to having you back." Sarah felt a weight lift. Hastings had been the source of so much hostility. Without him at Whitlow, returning might actually be pleasant. "That's good news, ma'am." "There's more," Vance continued. "We've been tracking your performance at Shaw. Lieutenant Colonel Webb sent glowing reports. The urban CAS training module you developed is being adopted by the entire A-10 community. You're making a name for yourself, Captain, the right kind of name." "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me yet. When you return to Tennessee, you're going to be the flight commander for our alert section. It's a leadership position, more responsibility. You'll be supervising other pilots, coordinating with external agencies representing the squadron. Are you ready for that?" Sarah thought about everything she'd learned at Shaw about teamwork, communication, building trust. "Yes, ma'am, I'm ready." "Good, finish strong at Shaw. We'll see you in 3 months." The call ended and Sarah sat back, letting it sink in. Flight commander. A leadership role. It was more than she'd hoped for, more than she'd thought possible after the storm incident. Maybe things were finally turning around. That weekend, Sarah drove off base to explore the area around Shaw. She ended up at a small airfield where local pilots flew everything from Cessnas to vintage warbirds. She watched them for a while, remembering her dad and those afternoons at the county airport. An older man approached, probably in his 70s, moving with the stiff gait of someone who'd been around aircraft his whole life. "You military?" he asked, nodding at her short haircut and bearing. "Yes, sir, Air National Guard." "Thought so. You've got the look. I'm Eddie Parsons. I run this airfield such as it is." They talked aviation for a while, swapping stories. Eddie had been a helicopter pilot in Vietnam, later a commercial pilot, now retired and teaching people to fly for fun. "You seem restless," Eddie observed, "like you're carrying something heavy." Sarah laughed. "Is it that obvious?" "When you've been around pilots as long as I have, you learn to read them. So what's weighing on you?" Sarah found herself telling him about Tennessee, the storm, the ongoing struggle to prove herself. Eddie listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. When she finished, he said, "Let me tell you something about being a pilot. It's not just about the flying. It's about the choices you make when the flying gets hard. Anyone can fly a plane on a clear day with no problems. But when the weather turns bad, when the pressure's on, when you've got to make decisions that might end your career, that's when you find out what kind of pilot you really are." "And what kind am I?" "The kind that does what's right even when it costs you. That's rare. Most people talk a good game, but when push comes to shove, they choose safety over courage. You didn't. You chose your family, your values, your mission. That took guts." "It almost cost me my career." Eddie shrugged. "Maybe, but you kept it, didn't you? You're still here, still flying, still fighting. That tells me you're tougher than you think." He paused, looking up at the sky where a small plane was practicing touch-and-goes. "I'll tell you what I told my students in Vietnam. Fear is useful. It keeps you alert, keeps you from doing stupid things. But fear can't be in charge. When you're flying, when lives depend on you, you've got to be able to push fear aside and do what needs doing. Sounds like that's what you did in Tennessee. Don't apologize for it." "People keep telling me I broke the rules." "Sure you did. And if breaking the rules was always wrong, we'd still be living in caves. Progress comes from people who understand that sometimes the rules don't fit the situation. The trick is knowing when, and from what you've told me, you knew." Sarah left the airfield feeling lighter. Eddie was right. She had made the right choice in Tennessee, and she wasn't going to keep apologizing for it. The final months at Shaw flew by. Sarah completed her instructor pilot certification, taught several students, and finished the urban CAS training module. The squadron threw her a going-away party, and even Simmons attended, though he kept his distance. Major Kim pulled Sarah aside during the party. "You did good here, Sarah. You came in with baggage and you turned it around. That's not easy." "I had help, you, Colonel Webb, others. I couldn't have done it alone." "None of us can, that's the point." Kim handed her a small package. Open it later. Sarah did back in her quarters that night. Inside was a patch, the gambler's squadron patch with a handwritten note. You're always part of this squadron, don't forget that. And don't let anyone tell you you're not good enough. You're better than good enough. You're exceptional. Rachel. Sarah packed the patch carefully with her gear, a reminder of the lessons she'd learned at Shaw. The drive back to Tennessee was long but gave Sarah time to think. She was returning different from when she'd left, more mature, more thoughtful, more confident in who she was as a pilot and a person. Emma and the kids met her at the state line, having driven up to surprise her. Grace and Tyler tackled her with hugs, and Emma held her for a long time. Welcome home, sis. It's good to be home. They drove to Copper Creek together. The town had rebuilt in Sarah's absence. New homes rose where flooded ones had been torn down. The main street had been repaved. FEMA trailers were gone, replaced by permanent structures. Life had moved on. Emma's house was fully repaired, looking better than it had before the storm. They had dinner together, and Tyler peppered Sarah with questions about Shaw and Nevada and what it was like flying with different squadrons. After the kids went to bed, Sarah and Emma sat on the back porch, watching fireflies in the gathering dark. I was scared, Emma admitted. When you left for Shaw, I thought maybe they were sending you away permanently, that I'd lost my sister because she'd saved my kids. They tried, Sarah said, but I'm stubborn. That you are, Emma smiled. What happens now? I go back to Whitlow, take over as flight commander, lead a team, do the job right. And the people who gave you trouble. Hastings is gone, new leadership, fresh start. Just like that, all the problems go away. Sarah shook her head. No, there will always be people who doubt me, who think I don't belong, but I've learned I can't control what other people think. I can only control how I respond. So I'm going to do my job, be the best pilot and leader I can be, and let my work speak for itself. When did you get so wise? When I stopped being so angry, Sarah looked at her sister. Thank you for grounding me, for reminding me why I do this. Tyler and Grace would be dead without you. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to repay that debt. You don't owe me anything. Family isn't about debts. It's about being there when it matters. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the summer night. Sarah was home, and for the first time in months she felt at peace. The first day back at Whitlow Air National Guard Base felt surreal. Sarah drove through the familiar gates, past the hangars where she'd logged so many flight hours, and parked in front of the operations building. Everything looked the same, yet everything felt different. Colonel Vance greeted her with a firm handshake. Welcome back, Captain. Let's get you settled. The new squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel Jennifer Hayes, was everything Vance had promised, professional, direct, and genuinely pleased to have Sarah on her team. I've heard good things about your time at Shaw, Hayes said during their initial meeting. The urban CAS module, the instructor pilot qualification, the leadership you showed. That's exactly what I need for the alert section. We've got some young pilots who need mentoring and some operational challenges that require creative thinking. Think you're up for it? Yes, ma'am, absolutely. Good, I want to be clear about something up front. What happened with the storm? I've read all the reports, talked to Colonel Vance, formed my own opinion. My opinion is that you made a difficult choice in an impossible situation. You saved lives, but you also created problems that we've spent months managing. I'm giving you a clean slate, but it's conditional on you demonstrating the leadership and judgment I know you're capable of. Fair. More than fair, ma'am. All right then, let's get to work. The alert section was responsible for maintaining aircraft and crews ready to launch on short notice for emergency response missions. It was demanding work that required coordination with civilian authorities, state emergency management, and other military units. As flight commander, Sarah would lead a team of 6 pilots and work directly with Master Sergeant Torres and his maintenance crew. Ray Torres was the first person Sarah sought out after her initial meetings. She found him in the hangar, supervising work on one of the A-10s. Captain Mitchell, Ray said with a broad smile. Heard you were back, about time. Missed you too, Ray. They walked to his small office and Ray closed the door. His expression turned serious. How was Shaw? Challenging, educational. I learned a lot about myself. Good, because things here have changed. Hastings is gone, which is a relief to everyone. Hayes is solid. but there's still some people who remember what happened during the storm, and not all of them are fans. I expected that. What you maybe didn't expect is that some people think you're a hero. There's been a shift in the town, Sarah. Copper Creek hasn't forgotten. They remember that you risked everything to help them. The mayor even asked if you'd come speak at the storm memorial ceremony next month. Sarah was surprised. The mayor wants me to speak. Half the town does. You're kind of famous around here. Ray grinned. Local girl who became a pilot, came back to save her family, stood up to the military establishment. It plays well. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that. Get comfortable, because whether you like it or not, you're a symbol. Use it wisely. Over the next weeks, Sarah settled into her new role. She met with each pilot in the alert section individually, learning their strengths and weaknesses. She developed training plans, coordinated with emergency management officials, and worked with Ray to ensure their aircraft were maintained to the highest standards. The pilots responded well to her leadership. She was fair, knowledgeable, and willing to listen. She pushed them to be better, but never asked them to do anything she wouldn't do herself. Slowly, the section began to gel into a cohesive team. One of her pilots was a young lieutenant named Marcus Webb, no relation to the colonel at Shaw. He was fresh out of flight school, enthusiastic but inexperienced. During one training flight, he made a series of small errors that could have become big problems in a real emergency. Sarah debriefed him carefully, balancing criticism with encouragement. Marcus, you've got the hands and feet to be a great pilot, but you're rushing. You need to slow down, think through each step, trust your training. Yes, ma'am, I just don't want to mess up. Fear of messing up is what causes you to mess up. Trust yourself, and trust me to be here to help when you need it. The young pilot nodded, clearly taking it to heart. As Sarah watched him walk away, she remembered all the times instructors had given her similar advice. The cycle continued, learning, teaching, growing. The storm memorial ceremony in Copper Creek was held on a Saturday in early October, almost a year after the flood. The town had built a small park on high ground with a memorial wall listing the names of those who had died. 14 names, 14 lives lost. Sarah stood with Emma and the kids, listening to the mayor speak about resilience and community. Then it was her turn. She walked to the podium, looking out at a crowd of several hundred people. Some she recognized, neighbors, old friends, people she'd known her whole life. Others were strangers, but they all wore the same expression: gratitude. I'm not great at speeches, Sarah began, so I'll keep this short. A year ago, our community faced one of the worst natural disasters in its history. We lost friends and neighbors. We lost homes and businesses. We lost parts of our town that will never be quite the same. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I was one of the lucky ones. I had the training and the opportunity to help my family when they needed it most. But I want to be clear about something. I wasn't the hero that day. The real heroes were the emergency responders who worked around the clock, the neighbors who helped each other, the volunteers who came from all over to assist with recovery. The real heroes were people like Dan Mercer and his team, who coordinated rescue efforts under impossible conditions. Sarah looked at Emma. The real heroes were families like mine who survived and rebuilt and refused to let tragedy define them. I just did what anyone would do. I protected the people I love. That's not heroism, that's family. She concluded by reading the names on the memorial wall, a moment of silence for each person lost. By the time she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. Afterward, people lined up to thank her, shake her hand, tell her their stories. A woman Sarah didn't know grabbed her in a tearful hug and said, "You saved my son. He was trapped on a roof near your sister's house. He saw your plane and knew help was coming. Thank you." An elderly man told her about watching the A-10 fly over, how it had given him hope when he thought all was lost. A young girl asked for Sarah's autograph, saying she wanted to be a pilot when she grew up. It was overwhelming and humbling and exhausting. By the time Sarah got home that evening, she felt wrung out but oddly at peace. She'd spent so long worrying about her career, her reputation, her standing in the military. But seeing the real impact of her actions, understanding what it had meant to the people of Copper Creek, that put everything in perspective. The next month brought new challenges. The alert section was activated for a wildfire response, deploying to support firefighting efforts in the eastern part of the state. Sarah led her team through a week of grueling operations, coordinating with incident commanders and flying surveillance missions to help track the fire's spread. It was exactly the kind of work the Guard was meant to do, serving the community in times of crisis. And Sarah found it deeply satisfying. This wasn't combat, wasn't about glory or recognition. It was about using her skills to help people who needed it. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes pulled her aside after they returned from the wildfire deployment. "Outstanding work, Captain. The incident commander specifically mentioned your team's professionalism and effectiveness. You've built something special with that alert section." "Thank you, ma'am. I've got great people." "You do, and they follow you because you've earned their respect." Hayes paused. "I'm putting you in for promotion to major. You've demonstrated the leadership and judgment required for the next level. Colonel Vance agrees. Expect your board to meet in the next few months." Sarah was stunned. After everything that had happened, after the reprimands and investigations and doubts, she was being promoted. It didn't seem possible. "I don't know what to say, ma'am." "Say you'll keep doing what you're doing. That's all I ask." That evening, Sarah called Tom Bradley, the retired A-10 pilot she'd met in South Carolina. They'd stayed in touch, and his mentorship had been invaluable. "Tom, they're promoting me." "Of course they are," Tom said, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "You're a talented officer who's learned from her mistakes and grown because of them. That's exactly who should be promoted." But after Tennessee, after all the trouble, "Sarah, let me tell you something. Every good officer I've ever known has had a moment where they had to choose between following the rules and doing what was right. The best ones choose right and accept the consequences. That's what you did. The military needs people like you, people who understand that the mission is bigger than the regulations." "I'm still learning that balance." "We all are every day. That's what makes this career interesting." They talked for another hour about leadership, about flying, about life. When Sarah hung up, she felt grateful to have found a mentor who understood the complexities of military service. The promotion board met in December. Sarah appeared before a panel of senior officers, answering questions about her experience, her leadership philosophy, her vision for her career. The letter of reprimand from the storm incident was in her file, and the board asked about it directly. "Captain Mitchell, you were formally reprimanded for unauthorized use of government property and violation of direct orders. Why should we promote you given that disciplinary action?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "Sir, I won't pretend that what I did was by the book. It wasn't, but I was faced with a situation where following orders meant letting my family die. I made a choice that I knew would have consequences, and I accepted those consequences. What I learned from that experience is that good judgment means understanding when the rules serve the mission, and when the mission requires looking beyond the rules. I believe that experience has made me a better officer and a better leader." "Some would argue it makes you a risk," another board member said. "How do we know you won't make similar decisions in the future that put the Guard in a difficult position?" "Because I've learned to build trust and communication with my chain of command. At Shaw, I learned that most conflicts between judgment and orders come from poor communication or misunderstanding. When leaders trust each other and communicate effectively, those conflicts are rare. My goal as a field-grade officer is to build that trust with my subordinates and superiors so we can accomplish the mission together." The board members looked at each other, then nodded. "Thank you, Captain." 2 weeks later, the results came back. Sarah had been selected for promotion to major. The ceremony was scheduled for January. On the day of her promotion, the hangar at Whitlow was packed. Colonel Vance officiated, with Lieutenant Colonel Hayes and the wing command chief pinning on Sarah's new rank. Emma and the kids were there, along with Ray Torres and the entire alert section. But the surprise came when Tom Bradley walked into the hangar, having driven up from South Carolina. And beside him was a face Sarah hadn't expected to see. Major Rachel Kim from Shaw, wearing dress blues and a smile. "Couldn't miss this," Rachel said, hugging Sarah. "You earned it." After the ceremony, as people mingled and congratulated Sarah, a television news crew asked if they could interview her. Sarah almost said no, then remembered Ray's words about being a symbol. She agreed. The reporter asked about the storm, about Shaw, about what the promotion meant to her. Sarah gave honest but measured answers, focusing on her team and the mission rather than herself. Then the reporter asked, "Some people criticize the military for being too rigid, for not allowing individual judgment. Based on your experience, what would you say to that?" Sarah thought about everything she'd been through. The storm, the investigations, Shaw, the long road back. Finally, she said, "The military needs structure and discipline. That's what makes us effective. But structure and discipline aren't the same as inflexibility. The best military units are ones that train their people to be thinking, independent professionals who can make good decisions in bad situations. That's what we try to build here at the Guard. People who understand the rules, respect the mission, and have the judgment to navigate complex situations. It's not always easy, but it's what makes us ready for the unexpected." "And what about your decision during the storm? Given everything that's happened, would you do it again?" Sarah smiled slightly. "I hope I'm never in that situation again, but if I were, if my family was in danger and I had the means to help them, yes, I'd do it again. Because at the end of the day, we wear this uniform to protect people. Sometimes that protection is abstract, national security defending freedom. But sometimes it's very specific, saving 2 kids from a flood. I'm not going to apologize for remembering what we're really here for." The interview aired that evening on the local news. It went viral online, shared across social media platforms and military forums. The reaction was overwhelmingly positive, with thousands of comments supporting Sarah and praising her honesty. But not everyone was happy. A few days after the interview, Sarah received a message that Major Derek Hastings wanted to see her. He'd heard about the promotion and the interview and wanted to clear the air.